worship. I can't hold back, I can't contain it, for all he's done. Jesus, my Savior, I am ablaze and full of thanks for his love breaking through my heart of stone, love breathing to awake my bones, love reaching out to save my soul, love never gonna let me go, love calling me as I am, love making me new again, love lifting me when I can't, love never gonna let me go. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, come as you are, come into his open arms. Wherever you've been, whatever you've done, come as you are, come find his love breaking through my heart of stone, love breathing to awake my bones, love reaching out to save my soul, love never gonna let me go, love calling me as I am, love making me new again, love lifting me when I can't, love never gonna let me go, love breaking through my heart of stone, love breathing to awake my bones, love reaching out to save my soul, love never gonna let me go, love calling me as I am, love making me new again, love lifting me when I can't, love never gonna let me go, love never gonna let me go, love never gonna let me go. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your perfect love is casting out fear. And even when I'm caught in the middle of the storms of this life, I won't turn back, I know you are near, and I will fear no evil, for my God is with coming for the heart that holds on, a glorious light beyond all compare. And there will be an end to these troubles, but until that day comes, we'll live to know you here on the earth, and I will fear no evil, for my God is with through In need of grace, in need of love, in need of mercy raining down from high above, in need of strength, in need of peace, in need of things that only you can give to me. In need of Christ, the perfect Lamb, my refuge strong, the great I am. This is my song, my humble plea. I am your child, I am in need of grace, in need of love, in need of mercy raining down from high above, in need of strength, in need of peace, in need of things that only you can give to me. In need of Christ, the perfect Lamb, my refuge strong, the great I am. This is my song, my humble plea. I am your child, I am in need of Christ, the perfect Lamb, my refuge strong, the great I am. This is my song, my humble plea. I am your child, I am in need. I am your child, I am in need. I still have joy, I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. I still have joy,
And I still have
I still have joy, I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. I still have joy,
I still have
peace, I still have peace, after all the things we've been through. I still have peace,
and I still have
faith, I still have faith, after all the things we've been through. I still have faith, I still have hope, I still have hope, after all the things we've been through. I still have hope,
I still have sweet love.
I still have love, after all the things we've been through. I still have
And I still have joy.
I still have joy,
I still have
I still have joy, after all the things we've been through. After all the things we've been through. After all the things we've been through. I still have joy. Every praise is to our God, every word of worship with one accord. Every praise is to our God. Sing hallelujah to our God, glory hallelujah is to our God. Every praise is to our God.
every praise
Every praise is to our God. Yes, He is. God, my Savior. God, my healer. God, my deliverer.
Yes, He is.
Yes, He is.
Yes, He is.
Yes, He is. God, my Savior.
God, my healer.
God, my healer.
God, my deliverer.
God, my deliverer.
Yes, He is.
Yes, He is.
Yes, He is.
Yes, He is. Every praise is to our God. Every word of worship with one accord.
Every praise.
Every praise. Every praise is to our God.
Sing hallelujah.
Sing hallelujah to our God. Glory, hallelujah is to our God. Every praise. Every praise. Every praise. Every praise. Every praise. Every praise is to our God. When I'm down, Lord, you pick me up. Then I fall on my knees. When I'm dry, Lord, you fill my cup. You always give what I need, and yours, Lord, I'll always be. When everything's right, I will praise you. In seasons of joy, I will sing, and even in trials, I'll still praise you. For you are my glorious King. Yes, you are my glorious King. When I'm up and blessings abound, and your grace falls like rain. When your love and mercy surround, Lord, I will praise you again. My God, Redeemer and friend. When everything's right, I will praise you. In seasons of joy, I will sing, and even in trials, I'll still praise you. For you are my glorious King. Yes, you are my glorious King. You came for me in the form of a man, bearing my sins on a cross, taking the shame and fulfilling.
All right. When we pulled in, it was getting close to time, and Didn't seem to be very many people. And then I walked in here to get ready to teach, and really it was only Nikki and I think it was only Nikki when I walked in. So I was like, But it looks like we got a good group tonight to continue our study here in the book of Exodus. So as you can see on the board today, we are going to be class number 14 with the idea of covering up through chapter 19. I do think I will get that done. I already have given Sterling quite a tall task to talk about all the 10 Commandments in only 2 classes. And in fact, if he feels like he needs 3, we do have another flex class toward the end we could absorb here. So the idea would be we'd get through that, and then Sterling will take the 10 Commandments in 2 sections. And I don't know how he's planning on covering that. All the 10 Commandments is one, and then maybe some history or however he's choosing to do that there. So I really don't want to short him, so we really do want to get all the way up through chapter 19 today. Just like I said on Sunday, we have changed our schedule a little bit from what topic we're going to cover on what day, because we did pick up that extra class there in class number 10, that extended plagues class. And so there is in the back on your way out, if you want an adjusted schedule, I printed some new ones, so they are back there if you would like to pick one up. Or you can just keep the same schedule, just understand we're going to the next class next time. So on Sunday, we had left the Red Sea. The Red Sea has been parted and closed again, and their journey has begun. They went from the Red Sea there. They traveled for 3 days into the wilderness, and they came to a place called Marah. And there the people started complaining again. In fact, Marah, part of that means to complain, to grumble a little bit there. Bitter is really what it means. It could not only refers to the water, but to the people who were bitter because they didn't have water to drink. And we did talk quite a bit on Sunday about that we're usually surprised by the fact that it's only been 3 days since those crazy, incredible miracles, and 3 days since the Red Sea closed over the Egyptians and saved them. How could they be doubting already? But it becomes much easier to understand when you think about walking in the desert for 3 days with no water. They'd be hurting pretty good there. We talked about how this is really the beginning of the relationship between God and his people. We tend to think of the overall big view, and that because God had a great relationship with Isaac and with Jacob, that as they were coming out of Egypt, that they probably knew everything about God and all those kind of things, because we do. I think sometimes we even forget that they weren't even a people yet because the law hasn't been given, they haven't agreed to the law, those kind of things. So they really didn't know God, and God is trying to teach them who he is and those kind of things. So really, we see this introduction to this relationship. God is trying to get them to depend on him, and so he's putting them through some of these trials here. But every one of these trials as we go through, we will see that, at least for a while, God really doesn't reprimand them much when they fail to trust him, when they fail to believe in him and rely on him. Instead of chastising them for that, he's going to try to build them up every time. Listen, just do this and I'll take care of it. Just do this and I'll take care of it. And what is the this he's almost always saying? Just obey, right? Just listen to my commandments, trust in me, and things are going to be okay. And he continually repeats this message here. So we really see the first of these conditional promises that are made to the people of Israel here. All of the other promises that he had made in Egypt, when Moses was going to the people and telling them what was going to happen, when God was talking to Moses and telling him what he was going to do for his people, what word was missing there? There was no if, right? God said, I am going to set my people free. Whether they deserve it or not, whether they are faithful to me or not, whether the Egyptians are good or not, it doesn't matter. This is what's going to happen, okay? God made some of those what we call unconditional promises that do not rely upon man holding up their part of the bargain. What God is going to start doing now, and we're going to see this all throughout the rest of the book here, including even the 10 Commandments themselves are a bit of a conditional promise there. We'll have this idea where God will promise, if you do this, then I will do that. And most often it is, if you will obey, if you will follow my commandments, then I will do something great for you, protect you or serve you or save you, whatever the good thing is going to be. Now, just because this conditional statement doesn't have it, most conditional promises from God say, if you do this, if you be good, then I will do this good thing for you. But a lot of them also have the flip side of that, right? But if you don't do that, then there's going to be consequences. So you're good, things are going to go good. You're not so good, things are going to go not so good for you either. This doesn't have that negative side. He's not introducing that yet. He's just continuing to try to build them up with these positive promises. If you will simply trust in me, then these are going to be the things that are going to go well. They leave Mara and they go to this place called Elim. It's a great place for them to rest, to recover from their journey, from the trials of going through the Red Sea and that stress and the constant walking. So they get here to Elim where there's plenty of water, plenty of food to be found, a really big oasis, and they stay there about a month. Now, as soon as we leave Elim then, we start to get to where right away they are now having issues with what are they going to eat, and pretty soon it's going to be what are they going to drink, but right away it becomes as soon as they leave, we're assuming they kind of carried enough water with them from Elim to last for a little while, but they probably just ran out of food. You have that many people sitting in one place for a month, there's not going to be a whole lot left. So they start complaining about food, and now all of a sudden we get this idea of manna. And so God really promises that he's going to provide for them in two different ways. In the evening, he provides manna, or quail, or sometimes they'll just say he gave you meat in the evening. And then in the morning, they will find this manna. And this is kind of where we had left off this idea on Sunday, talking about what is manna. We don't really understand it. Well, guess what? They didn't really know what it was either. The first time they come out to it in the morning, they make that statement, manna hu, or manhu, in how I would say those phonetic words there, in Hebrew, which literally means, what is it? They walk out and they see this stuff on the ground, they don't know what it is, and so they ask that question, what is it? And then we find out later down in verse 31 of that chapter 16 where that name sticks. That man, that what, sticks. And so that's what they call it. It is the what. We're going to go gather some what. We're going to cook some what. Okay, this is kind of weird when we would say it that way, but apparently they didn't think so. So what do we know about this manna? We covered a few points, and then I'm just going to briefly hit some of these that we did cover. Depending upon how much you studied this as a kid, or I even looked up this week just a couple little kids' books, and you see the children of Israel going out in the morning, and they're walking around, and what are they picking up from the ground? Bread, right? Loaves of bread. Because what does it say? God gave them their bread, okay? But it didn't really take the form of loaves of bread. In fact, we know that it was much more like flour than it was finished bread here. So just a couple things from at least a couple verses. It's compared to frost. It's much more like coriander seed. Some people even think that implied there is a ground coriander seed. It's white, it's flaky, it's very fine, okay? Much more like a powder than a loaf of bread. I don't know what word I was looking for there, okay? So we also find out from this passage that it could be prepared multiple ways. There's at least two ways that Moses tells them, when you collect this all up on the sixth day, you better either bake it or boil it, depending on what you're going to do with it. So again, it seems to be they made it into loaves or cakes like bread, and then they also boiled it, making like a dumpling, probably, that went with the rest of the meal there. So at least multiple ways they could prepare it. And it did have some very strange properties. And this is where we get to, there are a lot of people who are going to try to find some normal, physical, plausible explanation. Couldn't have been God doing some kind of miracle for them. There just had to be some kind of naturally occurring substance that 3 million people survived on for 40 years. But anyway, there are some very strange properties that really make us start to question how this could even be a natural product. It was only available for them to collect for a very short time. So the scripture says that in the morning when they came out and the ground was wet from dew, that dew had to evaporate. What was left behind was manna, but it wasn't just like regular flaky stuff, because what happened when the sun came out and it got hot? It would melt. If they left it on the ground, it would melt. But if they picked it up, what would happen? It would stay good. Okay? So whether they put it in baskets or in jars or however they collected it, whatever they harvested in the morning, it didn't matter how hot out it got, it stayed good as long as they just didn't leave it on the ground, because whatever they left on the ground, literally, it says melted. Okay? It only appeared for 6 days a week, but it appeared for all 6 days of the week, every Sunday through Friday for 40 years it appeared. But not once on a Saturday in 40 years did it appear. That's not normal there, okay? And it only lasted for a short period. So we know that if they were told to collect what they could, enough, 1 omer, which we said is about 2 liters or maybe 2 quarts worth of this stuff, they were to collect that up, but only to collect up what they could eat in that day, and they weren't to leave any over for the next day. Well, when they tried that, what happened to what they had gathered? Did it melt like it did in the morning? No, yeah, it went bad. I mean, so much more that worms kind of mysteriously sprang out of it. And so it would get worms and it would stink, it says, if they left it over 24 hours, unless they gathered it on Friday. Then Saturday morning it didn't stink, it was still good. Okay? Now it doesn't explicitly say, what we kind of can infer, that as long as whatever they had collected on Friday, they ate by the end of Saturday, but if they had any left over Saturday, what would happen Sunday morning? And get worms and stink, because what do they got to do Sunday morning? They got to go gather another omer for every person in their family there, okay? So sometimes it would spoil after 1 day, sometimes it would spoil after 2 days, and then we know that there was at least a portion that Moses was told to gather up and to put in a jar, and that jar was to kind of be put in as a monument for them. It was supposed to be put in as a testimony, it says, and that jar was supposed to stay. So from the first time they gathered it, we're not, I guess I should say 100% sure if did they dump that out and put new one in every morning? It doesn't seem to be. It seems like they put in a jar, sealed it up, and that stayed up there as a testimony for them. And while it was sealed in that jar, what they had gathered, at least apparently as far as we know, never went bad. Okay? So really some unique properties. And again, we know they ate it for 40 years. So right away here in chapter 16, we are seeing a preview of the upcoming failure at Kadesh Barnea, which dooms them to wander for 40 years. So all the way after the book of Exodus and Leviticus into the book of Numbers, chapter 13 or 14, around that portion of Numbers is where we find the events at Kadesh Barnea. And anybody know what happened there? What was their great failure that they doomed them to wander for 40 years? It's one of the most well-known child stories. What's that? Yeah, the spies. So the 12 spies went, and 10 came back and said, we can't do it, no matter who's helping us. And 2 came back and said, God's on our side. It don't matter who they are. Okay, so people listened to the 10, and so they're doomed to wander for 40 years. This is kind of the first preview that we're getting that is going to happen. Also, when we start talking about the manna, for us to read now, knowing what we know, knowing the history that's going to happen here in just a couple chapters, we see this idea that on the 6th day, you're supposed to gather enough so that on the seventh day you don't have to do what? You don't have to go gather. You don't have to go work, okay? So for the first time, we're going to see this idea of the mention of a Sabbath. Actually, chapter 16 is the first time that word is used in the Bible here, Exodus chapter 16. So there's going to be this day of Sabbath, this day of rest on the seventh day. Now, of course, we know this is very symbolic of what? The creation, right? First 6 days of creation, God worked. On the seventh day, he rested and said, all of this is good. And so to follow that pattern, what's being implemented here is this idea of you're going to work for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, you're going to get a day off. And so not only was this new to them, again, we tend to forget, they haven't heard this before, but can you imagine that you've been a slave for your whole life, forced to work day in, day out, make bricks, build these cities, beaten, and now all of a sudden you're being told you're going to have an entire day where you're supposed to do what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You're supposed to chill out and just enjoy the fact that God has brought you to a place where you can have a seventh day to do nothing. And as much as you would think that as a people who had been slaves and worked that hard, when someone said, just take the day off, what would you think they would do? Yes, sir. I'm going to go to work if I don't have to. But of course, we know they didn't get it. Because what do they know they did? At least a good number of them. They went out to gather. Sabbath comes, the seventh day, and they still go out, even though Moses had told them there's not going to be anything there. So they still go out, and God gets mad and says to them directly, okay, I already told you don't have to gather. Now on the Sabbath, don't you even leave what? Would have gone on over real well with our current environment. Don't you even leave your tent, right? You stay inside all day, okay? Just to rest. And he really enforces that idea on them here, okay? So of course we know that the Sabbath is going to become a law for them in just a little bit. So God really starts that law here, commanding them the Sabbath day is going to be a day of rest, and then we know that's going to be a huge part of the actual code of the Old Testament law here. One of the 10 commandments, in fact. So it's going to be that important. They then leave Elim, okay? So they're going from Elim, continuing on this journey as they're going towards Sinai. And obviously, you're still walking through a desert, so what becomes a problem again? Water, okay? Doesn't happen very long before, one more time, they run out of water. And again, obviously, it's a desert. They're going to run out of water. So people start to complain to Moses, and eventually he pushes back at them. Why are you complaining to me? Didn't God just do all this kind of stuff for us? But yet, eventually he gives in, and Moses goes to God, and remember what he says to him there? Hey, God, you better help me out here because the people are going to do what? They're going to stone me. That's right. They've had enough of not having water. So God, you better come up with some kind of solution here. So, of course, God does, and we're not even told he gets angry this time. So God is going to provide water. And we have this really interesting passage here in chapter 17 talking about the water. So, of course, what does God tell Moses to do in order for water to be found? Strike the rock. Take in your hand the staff of God, the same staff that he has worked all those miracles in Egypt with and all those things. You go up to the rock, you strike it, and water's going to come out. And so he does that. He goes up and he strikes the rock, and as God promised, water flows. So comparatively, it's not that big of a miracle. God makes some water appear. Okay. What's interesting about this is some of the language here. So the big question that comes up, how many times did Moses hit a rock? It's a great big question, okay? We're told here he hits a rock, but is it single or multiple times he hits a rock? They are still close to Elim. They have not yet made it to the place called Rephidim, where they're kind of in that journey where God tells him, strike the rock. When they get to Rephidim, what's going to happen there? he strikes a rock. When they get to Horeb, which is Mount Sinai, what happens there? He's going to strike a rock. Now, we don't see that story told over and over, but in this passage right here, all three places are mentioned. Strike the rock now, you're going to strike the rock at Rephidim, and you're going to strike the rock at Horeb. Okay? So at least 3 times, Moses strikes a rock and water is provided. Okay, so again, Rephidim is listed. It's also going to happen at Horeb. And there's an interesting passage in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Verses 1 through 4 is all about, the whole idea of the Old Testament's that schoolmaster, and that the entire events of the children of Israel going through the Exodus are really all about foreshadowing Christ coming. How that, the people were going to be baptized in the water of the sea, right? And that there was the water from the rock that followed them was who? Who does he say? It was Christ, right. So Paul directly says there that all throughout their journey, there was this water in the rock that followed them throughout that journey, and that water and that rock was Christ. So there's a pretty strong textual argument here that even past Kadesh Barnea, when they were wandering for 40 years, it's entirely plausible and correct according to the text to think that almost every day, what was Moses doing? He was striking a rock and providing water. Okay? In fact, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I don't think it's before the end of the book of Exodus, right? Where he finally, it's in Numbers, right? So he finally gets so frustrated with striking this rock and the people complaining that what does he do one day? He doesn't strike it, what does he do? He just goes out and yells at it. Makes me think of, never mind, several movies where people yell at rocks, trying to get them to break. Dune is the one I'm thinking of for you sci-fi people. But anyway, so Moses gets so angry that instead of striking the rock, he speaks and still water comes out. Now God doesn't abandon Moses as the leader. When he says, we're going to get you water, God still gets water, but his big mistake is twofold there. He speaks instead of striking the rock, and what does he say that really kind of gets God's anger raised up? Yeah, who was providing the water? Yeah, God was really providing the water, but who does Moses say? We. He makes himself equal with God as being the provider there. So again, I don't know that it's a big deal here how many times we think Moses strikes a rock, but they're wandering around in the desert for a long time where there would be a lot of people. They'd be having to carry in a lot of water if God wasn't providing for them. So just something to think about. Textually, it does seem like this was a regular occurrence where God was providing water by Moses striking the rock. The next story we find there, then continuing in chapter 17, is this idea of Israel's first battle. And really the reason I call this Israel's first battle is it's the first time they're going to have to fight. Was there a battle against the Egyptians? Well, depending on your definition of battle. There was a big army chasing them, intent on killing them, and that army got wiped out. What's the difference? God did it 100% on his own, where here, the children of Israel, for the first time, Israel's going to have to participate. Okay? So, of course, Israel is now camped at Rephidim, and the Amalekites, or however you want to say that, come to do battle. Now, this is another point, and Sterling and I have both talked about this, that we're not really sure about where things happened. So again, we're just kind of using this map as the more traditional expectation. Mount Sinai is all the way down at the bottom, and you'll see just above the words of Mount Sinai there where it says Rephidim, right down here, okay? So if that was there, does anybody know where the Amalekites, you know where they were at? Yeah, more way north, right? Okay, so way up there is where the Amalekites were, or Amalekites. I'm going to keep saying it a bunch of different ways. So either they come all the way down here to do battle, which doesn't actually seem very plausible, or that's really not where Rephidim was, meaning that's not where Sinai was, and I actually think probably more plausibly Sinai was over here, which makes a lot more sense now for the Amalekites to say, hey, they're coming our way. We got to do something before they get here, okay? Now, it also is interesting to me, hold on one second, Tim, I'll get you. It's also interesting to me that when you look at maps like this, very traditional, very kind of the accepted path is down around the horn, you'll see on the right-hand side of the Gulf there is listed Midian. But in order to make the Bible passages fit, we know that's where Midian was. Where do they also have to kind of put Midian might have been? Look way down at the bottom of the peninsula. They have to put Midian there because so many events happen at Sinai, right? That's where the burning bush was. So Moses was in Midian, but was followed as sheep to Mount Horeb. Oh, kind of seems all the way down there. The sheep made it that far? I don't know. So anyway, wherever it was, they were at Rephidim when the Amalekites come to attack. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. About that far. Yeah. It's plausible. You could plan that. Yeah. I mean, it's at least 100 miles. I know that. So I don't know exactly how many miles. Maybe somebody who's got a map can figure it out real quick. Or just Google from Philistia to the tip of the Sinai Peninsula. I don't know. It was not just a one-day journey. No matter what, it was a multi-day journey if they were going all the way down that far. But again, it doesn't matter. What matters here is that Israel is making their way from slavery to the promised land. Everybody else, remember Philistines, Moabites, Ammonites, the Canaanites, they've heard about what happened in Egypt, and what do they not want to do? They don't want to fight against Israel and God, but the Amalekites apparently thought they could get away with it. And so they come down. Israel apparently sees them coming or has some kind of forewarning that they're coming, and so they formulate this plan. What's that plan? So Moses tells Joshua, one of my heroes, hey, you pick out the army and you go fight. And while you're fighting, I'm going to go up on this hill or this mountain. I'm going to go where I can see all those things, okay? And then I'm going to take with me the staff of God that I have used for all these miracles. And Moses, now we're not told God told him to do this, but Moses kind of figures out that this is where the power is. And whenever the people needed help, what did I do? Raise it up. So he says, I'm going to go on a hill and I'm going to raise my staff up and you're going to go do battle and God's going to help us. And guess what? Works pretty good, okay? Plan works pretty well, at least at first. Because what happens? What's the weakness in the plan? Yeah. Moses is the weakness, right? I mean, he's not a young guy. He's in his 80s, right? And he's standing up there on the hill trying to hold this staff up. And eventually what happens? He starts to fall down, okay? And so it was probably fun for everybody, wasn't it, watching me try to do that. So Aaron and Hur now come up on the hill, and they are going to support Moses, okay? They get a rock for him to sit on, and then they're going to hold up his hands. And there's a ton of pictures out there you can find. I found this one. Their faces are kind of comical, but the idea, Moses literally was tired from holding his hands up, and so they sit him on a rock, and then they take one side each, and they kind of prop his arms up. And as long as his arms are up, what happens? The army wins. When his arms start to droop, the army starts to fail. Okay, so it works out here. And in the end, it does work out well for Israel. It says, and Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Interesting note here, overwhelmed Amalek and his people probably refers to the god Amalek and his followers, the Amalekites here, is probably what that refers to. So not only did Joshua win, but God won in the spiritual battle here. And because of that, the Lord pronounces judgment on Amalek. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Okay? Now, this isn't going to be fulfilled for 400 plus years, but just as we talked about, I don't remember if it wasn't Sunday because I was working Sunday. Last Sunday in Lawrence's lesson, what was Saul commanded to do? Go and wipe out who? The Amalekites, because of this passage right here. Okay? Interesting to note, it's fulfilled in God's time, not ours. We would tend to think, and probably the people of Israel and definitely the Amalekites, if they heard about this, would think, well, man, it ain't happening after a couple hundred years. But 400 years later, God imposes his will, and that happens. All right, we get to chapter 18, and we're not going to read all of chapter 18. It's 27 verses. There's lots of pretty interesting detail here, but really nothing much happens. Okay? So what happens is Moses' family comes to see him. Jethro, which it says is his father-in-law, you may remember we talked about it's probably more likely it's really his grandfather-in-law, and Jethro is probably more of a title than a name. Anybody remember what it means? We talked about? It means excellency or his excellency, okay, applied to the high priest of Midian, which we know Jethro was. Okay, so he comes here and he brings Zipporah, who was Moses' wife. When all this was going down in Egypt and all this battle, he had sent Zipporah and his two sons back to live with her family there in Midian to be safe. So now Jethro is going to come and bring them. They catch up. It's a really interesting passage. It says they meet and they exchange their tales and they kiss and they go in the tent. It's kind of interesting there. Okay. And Jethro then makes this incredible statement. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods because he has done what? He's overcome them. Okay? So he makes this incredible statement here of faith. And Jethro, whether he worshiped Jehovah before or what high priest he was, we don't know, but he is now committed to Jehovah here. Jethro kind of hangs around and sees what apparently was happening every day. So Moses spends all day as a judge. It says the next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. Constant line of people coming to Moses to try to fix what's going on. And Jethro says, why are you doing that? He says, well, somebody's got to tell them what to do. And so, of course, that's where we see Jethro starts to give some advice on what is needed here. What you are doing is not good, is what he tells Moses. It's not that you're doing a bad job of being the judge, but guess what? You're one man with how many people? Up to 3 million, right? 600,000 to 3 million, somewhere in that range, okay? You cannot judge them all. So he makes this, really great advice here. Go and find able men, people who hate a bribe, and set them up as judges. And then they decide and they judge the people at all times. If there's any really hard case or any serious big deal, they should bring it to you, Moses. But other than that, you let them deal with that. And so that's what Moses does. What's really going on here? If you think about it, when they were slaves in Egypt, who was the ruler? Pharaoh. Who were the judges? The Egyptian rulers that Pharaoh set over them. They have left Egypt. They have been gone at least a month and a half now, coming up on 3 months here really quick. And what kind of government do they have? Zero. Moses. Which is why what's happening every single day. People are coming to Moses with their gripes. This person hit me. I mean, can you imagine what that would have been like? One guy trying to judge all those people. So really we start to see this rudimentary government starts to be set up. How are the people of Israel going to govern themselves? Of course, we know this will become more solidified with who it gets split up by family, right? So you're going to have your elders in each tribe. They will report, from the tribe, you'll have your elders. Then it goes down to the family levels, down to the city, and so forth. So really, this is the beginning of that here. All right, we're running out of time, and I really don't want to leave Sterling in a lurch here. So we're going to get to Sinai. The journey's completed. The goal of the trip, the entire time from when they left Egypt, it was they were going to go to the mountain to worship God. That was the purpose of the journey. So now they have made it. There's been many tests along the way, but we are ready. God begins by outlining the very first principles of this relationship. Right away here in chapter 19, you know what I've already done, which is what? Saved you out of Egypt. So you know that I'm on your side. If you will only obey, then you will be, and he outlines 3 special things here. You will be my treasured possession. You'll be treasured above all other people in the earth, because the entire earth is God's, not these other gods. Don't worry about them. God Jehovah is in charge of everything, and you're going to be preeminent among those people. And you are going to be a holy kingdom of priests. As long as you do what? Obey. As long as, let's see if I got it here. If, right? If you will just obey, all these things will happen here. And this is not a one-sided relationship. It's not like when God came to rescue them and he just said, I'm going to do it. There's nothing you can do to stop it, or you don't have to agree. It's just going to happen. God actually tells Moses, go do what? Go present this to the people and see if they what? See if they agree, right? Are they going to do this? So Moses comes back down and he talks to the people, and all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. Watch out for that in the rest of this book. At least 5 more times we are going to see the entire group of people make this kind of statement. Yes, we will do it. Yes, we will do it. Yes, we will do it. And sometimes only a day later they said, yes, we will do it, and oh, no, we're not. Okay, but just watch for how many times they agree to this. It's not just God giving them no choice. They actually agree to it there. Okay? Now they're at the mountain, and now God is coming. And God is coming in a way that is different from anything that has happened in human history before, anything they have experienced up to this point, even all of those incredible miracles in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea. Nothing is going to prepare the people for what's going to happen next year. For the first time, God is coming in person to the mountain. Okay, God himself is going to be there. Behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. This is going to be a different cloud than led them out of Egypt, hid them from the Egyptians, and has followed them the whole way. This is something completely different than what they have seen, okay? And it's going to be special. So Moses goes, and based on some instructions, God says, you got to prepare. You need to consecrate yourselves. Prepare yourselves. Start thinking about, we're going to be here to worship God. Wash all your clothes. Get clean. Wash yourselves. You're going to be in the presence of God. No sex. Was that God's requirement or just Moses's? God didn't say it, but Moses did. So I don't know if Moses did a pretty good job of just saying what God said. So for whatever reason, they're not supposed to have sex until God comes here. So be ready for the 3rd day. Any common phrase there you can recognize right away as a Christian? On the third day, starts to take a lot of preeminence right here. On the third day, God is going to come. God then sets the rules of what this interaction is going to be, okay? The people must be consecrated even to approach the mountain, okay? You got to be clean, you got to be prepared, you got to be mentally ready, you have to have spent some time. It's not explicitly told here, but many people believe probably fasting was part of that consecrating there. You have to prepare yourself to meet your God. And you have to make sure then that no one actually goes on the mountain, even touching the edge of it. Because if you even touch the edge of that mountain, what has to happen? That's it, okay? Anybody who touches the mountain must be killed. They're going to be contaminated, not badly, but they would be bringing that contamination to God. And so you're not even allowed to kill them by touching them. What did it say? How did you have to kill them? From a distance, right? You either stone them or you shoot them. Not like we would think shooting, it's arrows, but you got to kill them from a distance. If someone breaks this law, you can't even touch them, okay? Again, just showing how special this is. This applies to everyone and everything, not just people, but all the animals too. If there's an animal that goes up on the mountain, it has to be stoned or shot. And I know we're running out of time, but we have to read this passage because it's so impactful. Turn with me, if you will. I'm going to read these 4 verses in Exodus chapter 19, verses 16 through 20 here. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Can you even imagine what that was like? I can't even, I don't think I, in my imagination, could do justice to it. The lightning and the thunder and the cloud and the fire and the ground shaking and some kind of sound like a trumpet that starts out as this incredible blast that calls them all to the mountain and just gets louder and louder and louder. I just can't imagine what that would have been like, okay? Moses is called to the top. At first, Moses is told, okay, now go get the priests and bring them back, but we have this weird statement here where Moses says, but hey, you told me I'm not supposed to bring anybody else. And then God says, oh yeah, that's right. Only you and Aaron. Don't let the priests come up here because they'll die if they come up here. It's kind of a weird exchange I do want to talk about in a minute. And so really, to prep for Sterling, everything is ready. God is present on the mountain. The people are gathered at the base. They're consecrated. They're ready. And Moses and Aaron go up on the mountain. The stage is set for one of the greatest moments in history that is about to happen. Nothing like it has happened before. Absolutely nothing is like it has happened since. In the giving of the 10 Commandments, God the Father himself, in his full power and might, is going to speak to the people. It's an amazing thing. And I will leave that there for Sterling to pick up. Now, something I'm going to throw in, there's no singing or afterwards there, so I can hold you for a few minutes. Sorry. Who does Moses talk to? This is going to be real quick. In this passage, there seems to be 2 different aspects of God here. There's the God speaking from the cloud, then there's also God who speaks face to face with Moses. Notice the language in some of these verses. Verse 21, the Lord spoke to Moses in the first person. But yet in verse 23, the Lord speaking to Moses says, don't let the people come up here, lest the Lord break out against them, in the third person. Not unless I break out against them, lest the Lord. Kind of weird. And again, the same thing happens after that whole, wait a minute, you told me just to me. You told me I couldn't bring the priests. Well, then in verse 24, again, the Lord said to him in the first person, Don't let the people come out, lest he. It doesn't even use the Lord again. It uses a third person pronoun to say unless God washes over them. So God refers to himself in the third person. It's really weird. There's these two aspects of God here. Something that I just want you to watch out for the rest of the class here, especially as Moses is interacting with God in the tent of meeting and all these kind of places. There's something really weird going on out here. Watch for this. Moses is able to speak face to face with an aspect of God sometimes, but sometimes God says what? And you can't see me or what's going to happen. You're going to die. In this very passage, the rest of this book, that's going to happen, okay? Oftentimes, this aspect that Moses talks to face looks like a person, okay? Actually says, appeared as a man. It's interesting that this aspect often refers to God the Father as a separate entity, because sometimes both aspects are present. There's God talking to Moses down here, but there's also God up on the mountain talking to the whole people. How does that happen, that there's two aspects of God's in the same place at the same time? And of course, we are going to see here, Moses is going to build a different kind of relationship with this aspect of God that he talks to face than the aspect of God that's on the mountain. That aspect of God that's on the mountain, he's scared to death of. But the aspect he talks face to face, it actually says he talked to him like a what? Like a friend. He argues with this person. Surely we can save these people. He wouldn't argue with that aspect of God that's on the top of the mountain. So just something to keep in mind as we go through here, that there's some really weird language in this book of Exodus that talks about there being two aspects of God. They're both God. They both speak with the authority of God, but they have very different characteristics. So just think about that. And I know you're saying, what in the world, Scott, are you saying? But we'll see. Just keep watching that as we go through. Thank you so much.